Hello and welcome to the engagement session regarding land use planning and agricultural plans. This is part of a larger engagement initiative that was undertaken in May 2023, where there were 4 specific engagement related topics up for discussion. The first being land use planning. There was also a session on emergency planning, water priorities for agriculture, and business viability. Each of the other 3 topics can be found through individual presentations. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of some examples of land use planning actions that can be found in agricultural plans from other jurisdictions, and then provide an outline and overview of some of the work being undertaken currently by the regional district. Lastly, there will be some discussion questions for consideration, and these discussion questions are also found through an external link to a survey where you can fill in your answers that way as well for submission. So in terms of some examples of land use planning and how it overlaps and integrates with agricultural planning in other jurisdictions, we can see that there is an important conceptual iteration and imperative to consider land use within the context of agriculture to ensure consistency with changes to provincial legislation, specifically with regards to the Agricultural Land Commission Act and associated agricultural land reserve regulations, but also in keeping with Ministry of Agriculture and Food best practices and guidelines for land use as well. This can also be seen through a discouraging of subdivision near agricultural land to keep the overall landscape fabric intact. Also protecting agricultural land for agricultural production, so ensuring that there's some compliance and enforcement when people are doing things that are against regulation. This can include dumping, changes to land use, infilling, subdivision, and so on. There's also an important consideration for deterring changes that can take farmland out of food production or development or tourism. And so looking at some of those lenses to ensure that land use is kept for priority use for agriculture throughout the ALR and sometimes also the non-ALR agricultural lands as well. It is also important for local governments to direct residential growth away from agricultural land. Of course, there are some allowances for residential development within the ALR, specifically secondary dwellings that are under a certain size limit. However, by and large, looking at infill and urban growth boundaries to keep residential development in check. There's also, of course, an important consideration around recreational use of land, both near to and adjacent to farming. There can often be conflicts between recreational users and producers, and there's a need for the local government to play a role in minimizing some of those issues. So let's turn now to some of the initiatives and also opportunities that the Comox Valley Regional District is undertaking with regards to land use and planning and how that may intersect with agricultural plans. First, we'll look at the CVRD policy framework, as well as current projects such as the Regional Growth Strategy, or RGS Review, Coastal Flood Adaptation Strategy, Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory, and Climate Adaptation Strategy, and then also looking at implementation tools through the Development Permit Area and Zoning Bylaw. In terms of framework, it's important to note that there are 3 levels. The top level for policy is the Regional Growth Strategy. And then beneath the regional growth strategy, there are official community plans and then zoning bylaws. And so within the context of the CVRD, all of these policies are nested within each other. And so this policy framework allows for each of the individual components to speak to one another and allow consistency. Within this policy framework, there is the opportunity to protect land for agriculture, to ensure food security, to increase farming activity, to raise awareness by promoting agriculture and education around the agri-food sector, to preserve larger parcels for subdivision, and also to protect agriculture as an important economic sector in the region. In terms of specific current projects, the Regional Growth Strategy Review is going to be looking at a targeted update that focuses on implementation and looking at minor amendments to the current regional growth strategy. There is the intention to bring forward the initiation of the amendment this summer in June of 2023. There's also a coastal flood adaptation strategy, phases 1 and 2 underway. Phase 1 was completed in 2021 and included quite a lot of the flood hazard mapping. And then phase 2 was completed in 2022, which looked at the risk options assessment And then phase 3 will be initiated later this year to look specifically at what the flood mitigation process can be for the region. This has implications for agriculture because much of farmland, not just within the Comox Valley, but province-wide, is also found within floodplains. And so there will be some overlapping actions and areas of priority. There was also a community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which was completed in 2023. It provides a complete picture of the region's emission sources, and it found that transportation and buildings were the highest share of emissions, and the agricultural sector was quite low at only 2%, and I think that this is probably in line with what the producers and the agri-food sector had expected. There's also a climate action strategy, which is a scoping to use data from the inventory that will provide climate action efforts to develop a reduction pathway for greenhouse gas emissions too. And it would be important for the agricultural community to continue to be involved in those efforts. Lastly, wanted to talk a little bit more about specific zoning opportunities and particular the development permit area concept. So development permit area can be used to provide guidelines for certain types of development in certain specific areas of the region. And in this case, it's being applied to the boundary between the ALR and non-ALR lands. And it specifically speaks to those who would like to construct buildings within the development permit area and includes a review of that farming and non-farming interface. There's opportunities to engage with neighboring farmers, to receive advice from the Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission, and the DPA can also set up conditions from which the non-farm side boundary of development must be responsible for things like vegetative buffering, landscaping, fencing, and building setbacks. The overall objective is to protect the agricultural activities going on, to make sure that there is a reduction in nuisance complaints and minimizes the overall potential conflicts between farming and non-farming neighbors. So with that context in mind, we put forth 5 questions here regarding land use and the agricultural plan. First off, what are some of the most important land use issues that your farm or food business operation encounters? Secondly, does transit and housing availability influence your ability to attract farm workers? Third, is there a need for more edge planning, for example, where urban areas meet agricultural areas in order to reduce conflict? Fourth, how does recreation, parks, and trails affect agriculture, and how can they be designed to benefit agriculture? And lastly, how can agriculture be a partner in meeting community climate change goals? These questions are available through the online survey link, which is available on the CVRD's Agricultural Plan website. If you have any input and answers to these questions that you would like to contribute, we recommend and encourage you to complete the survey. My name is Ione Smith, and I'm available at the following email address, ione@uplandconsulting.ca, or by phone 778-999-2149, should you wish to discuss this or any other topic related to the Comox Valley Agricultural Plan. Thank you very much for your attention and interest.